The stars had never been kind to the weak. Grand Admiral Verk had learned that truth before he could walk. Born on the Empire's core world of Velkaran, raised in the shadow of warships so massive they blotted out the sun during parade formations, he had spent 60 years watching the galaxy sort itself into two categories: those who ruled and those who were ruled. The line between them was simple: power, nothing else. So when the intelligence report landed on his desk that morning, thin, unremarkable, flagged Class 3 primitive, outer fringe, Sector 7G, he did what he always did with such reports. He glanced at it. He noted the star, a yellow dwarf, nothing special. He noted the planet, third orbit, nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, 71% liquid water surface. He noted the species: bipedal, carbon-based, average lifespan 79 standard cycles, currently in what the Empire's xenosociologists called the self-destruction phase, the period where a young species had enough technology to kill itself, but not enough wisdom to stop it. He filed the report. He did not read the footnote at the bottom, added by a junior analyst named Tessevek, who had been monitoring the species for 3 months, and had developed something she could only describe as an uneasy feeling. The footnote read: anomalous observation. Species demonstrates simultaneous capacity for extreme violence and extreme cooperation depending on perceived threat origin. Internal conflicts are frequent and brutal. However, when facing an external adversary, even a simulated one in their recorded media, subjects display remarkable unity and adaptive problem solving. Recommend elevated monitoring. Analyst T. The footnote went unread. On the third planet of that unremarkable yellow star, a woman named Dr. Amara Osei was standing in a control room in Kourou, French Guiana, watching a rocket climb into the sky. Around her, engineers were crying. Not from sadness, from the specific, overwhelming relief of people who had spent 7 years building something and were only now, in this moment, watching it actually work. The Endurance IV, humanity's first crewed interstellar probe, was carrying 7 people toward Proxima Centauri. The journey would take 11 years. They had volunteered for it knowing they would be middle-aged by the time they arrived, old by the time they returned, if the return worked at all. Amara watched the rocket disappear into the blue and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not pride, exactly. Something older than pride. Something that felt like the entire weight of human history, every war, every plague, every famine humanity had clawed through, compressing itself into a single upward trajectory. She didn't know that 3 Empire scout ships were already parked behind the moon, running silent, recording everything. She didn't know that one of the scouts had sent back a report that morning, nodding the launch, nodding the 7-person crew, nodding the argument that had broken out in the capsule 20 minutes before liftoff, over which crew member got the seat with the better viewport angle. Back on Velkaran, that particular detail had generated a brief moment of amusement in the intelligence office, and then been forgotten entirely. It would be, historians would later agree, the most expensive laugh in Imperial history. The gracious offer descended through Earth's atmosphere on a Tuesday morning. It chose Tuesday deliberately. The Empire's contact protocols had been refined over 3,000 years and 200 first contact scenarios, and the data consistently showed that species were psychologically most destabilized midweek, far enough from the weekend's rest to be anxious, too far from the next to feel hopeful. The ship was also enormous, 4.2 kilometers long, black as deep space, shaped like something between a sword and a cathedral. It positioned itself over the Atlantic Ocean and just hovered, letting the sight of it sink into every camera, every phone screen, every terrified human eye that turned skyward that morning. Billions of people watched it happen live. The broadcast that followed came in 47 languages simultaneously, the Empire's translation AIs having spent 3 months quietly cracking human linguistics. The voice was smooth, genderless, and carried the specific warmth of someone offering you a gift they know you cannot refuse. The terms were simple. Earth would formally acknowledge the sovereignty of the Galactic Empire. Earth would contribute to labor quotas and resource extraction programs. In return, humanity would receive infrastructure investment, and within 3 generations, full imperial citizenship. It was, the voice explained, an honor. The broadcast lasted 6 minutes. Then the gracious offer went silent and waited. The Empire expected the standard response cycle. First, approximately 48 hours of global panic. Second, political fragmentation, as various human governments attempted to negotiate individually, each hopping for better terms. Third, a formal delegation arriving within 1 week, frightened and compliant. Instead, within 4 hours, a single transmission came back. Dr. Amara Osai's face appeared on the gracious offer's communication screen. She was sitting at a desk. She had a notepad. She looked. The Empire's junior diplomat envoy Castellan noted with some unease, like a person who had been expecting a meeting and had prepared for it. "Thank you for the proposal," she said. "We have several questions. First, can we receive the full terms in writing? Second, does the Empire have a recognized arbitration process for disputed clauses? Third, what is the governance structure for the labor quota system, and is there an independent oversight body?" Castellan blinked. The questions kept coming. By the end of the first hour, humanity had submitted 340 individual questions about the terms of the offer: legal questions, administrative questions, questions about appeal processes and dispute resolution and historical precedents from other absorbed worlds. Castellan had been doing this for 20 years. No species had ever asked about an appeal process. Most species barely finished reading the terms before sending a surrender delegation. He forwarded the questions to Imperial Command with a note: "Contact proceeding atypically, requesting guidance." Grand Admiral Verk received the message, skimmed it, and sent back 4 words: "Give them 30 cycles." 30 standard cycles, 14 months by Earth's calendar. 14 months to comply. On Earth, Amara Osai ended the transmission, set down her notepad, and looked at the room full of people watching her. Then she said something that would be quoted in every history book written about this period for the next 1,000 years, though at the time it felt completely ordinary. "All right," she said, "let's get to work." Empire watched and waited for the panic to arrive. It didn't. What arrived instead, from the Empire's surveillance perspective, looked almost like organized calm, which was, in xenosociological terms, essentially impossible for a Class 3 species. Class 3 species panicked. They fragmented. Their governments collapsed inward under existential pressure. It was documented. It was reliable. It was, frankly, one of the reasons absorbing them was so straightforward. But Earth was doing something different. Within 3 weeks of the gracious offer's arrival, 17 heads of state had met in emergency session in Geneva. Within 5 weeks, that number was 142. Within 2 months, every sovereign nation on Earth, including 6 that had been in active armed conflict with each other the previous year, had signed the Geneva Accord for Unified Planetary Response. The document was 3,000 pages long. It had been negotiated, drafted, debated, revised, and passed in 61 days. In comparison, the last major international climate agreement had taken 11 years and still hadn't been fully ratified. The Terran Defense Collective emerged from that accord like something that had been waiting to be born. It had no single leader. It had no single headquarters. It was a distributed network of every meaningful human institution that had anything to do with survival: space agencies, militaries, physics departments, engineering firms, biotech companies, logistics networks, agricultural planners, energy grids. They shared servers. They shared personnel. They shared secrets that individual nations had been hoarding for decades. The Empire's analysts watched all of this and drew the wrong conclusion. They saw activity, yes. They saw resource mobilization and political coordination. But their models told them what this had to be: a symbolic gesture, a species building a monument to its own defiance before the inevitable. It happened sometimes. The Korathi had done it, spent their final 3 months constructing a great wall visible from orbit. The Sereni had done it differently, composing a formal lament that they broadcast into space for weeks before compliance. Every species, in its own way, made a gesture. This was humanity's gesture. The analysts filed their reports with calm confidence. What the analysts did not understand, what they could not understand without someone explaining 5,000 years of continuous human warfare to them, was that humanity wasn't building a monument. Humanity was doing what it had always done when it felt genuinely threatened by something it couldn't talk its way out of. It was building weapons. And unlike the Korathi, unlike the Sereni, unlike every other Class 3 species that had faced this moment, humanity already had the industrial base, the metallurgical expertise, the propulsion research, the weapons physics, and the sheer accumulated institutional knowledge of a species that had spent millennia in a constant arms race with itself. They weren't starting from scratch. They weren't even starting from behind. They were converting. In orbit above Earth, construction was happening so fast it was visible to civilian telescopes. Frames went up in days. Hulls were welded in weeks. Weapon arrays that had existed only as theoretical designs in classified military research folders were being physically manufactured and mounted on ships that hadn't existed 3 months ago. A young Indian girl named Priya Nair, 16 years old and working out of her bedroom in Chennai, was doing something more quietly remarkable. She had obtained a partial recording of the gracious offer's engine signature, leaked online by an amateur radio astronomer, and had spent 2 months reverse engineering the fundamental principles of the Empire's FTL drive from the exhaust harmonics alone. She submitted it as her school science project with a 3-line cover note. "I think I understand how they move so fast. I've also written a theoretical proposal for how to disrupt it." Her teacher, a retired aerospace engineer named Mr. Subramaniam, read it once, read it again, and then picked up the phone and called a number he'd been given 3 weeks ago when the TDC had asked every school in India to flag any exceptional student work related to propulsion or physics. The TDC contacted Priya the next morning. 14 months was a long time, the Empire believed, because every species they had ever encountered needed every moment of it to come to terms with the inevitable. They had never encountered a species for whom 14 months was just enough time to get ready. The 3 Imperial enforcement cruisers dropped out of FTL above the moon at 3:40 GMT on a Wednesday morning, running standard compliance procedures, expecting a quiet orbit and a frightened planet below. Instead, every sensor array on all 3 ships screamed simultaneously. Captain Drev Orlin of the lead cruiser Unyielding had been doing compliance runs for 15 years. He had performed them on 11 worlds. He was, by all measures, experienced, calm, and difficult to surprise. He stood at his sensor console and stared at the readout for 4 full seconds before he accepted that it was accurate. 47 Terran warships sat in a layered defensive perimeter around Earth. They were angular, dense, clearly constructed in a hurry. There was a rough quality to their profiles that the Empire's elegant, curve-hulled vessels never had, but their weapon signatures were extraordinary. Kinetic accelerators that could punch through Imperial hull plating, dense point defense grids, and the 12 ships positioned behind the moon's dark side, which had been invisible until the cruisers crossed the threshold, and the moon's own orbital mechanics had rotated them into sensor range. Those 12 were different, larger. Whatever was mounted on their forward hulls had an energy signature that Orlin's weapons officer couldn't classify because she had never seen anything like it. The cruisers stopped their approach. Standard protocol in cases of unexpected resistance was to hail the planet and demand compliance. The tone was important, firm, final, the voice of an authority that had never had to repeat itself. Orlin composed himself and activated the channel. Dr. Amara Ose appeared on his screen. She looked, Orlin would later tell investigators at the debrief, completely at ease. not the forced calm of someone suppressing terror. The genuine, settled calm of someone who had anticipated this exact moment and had made her peace with every decision that led to it. "Captain," she said, "good morning. Before we discuss terms, I want to share some information with you." Orland said nothing. He was waiting for a demand, a threat, something he could push back against. "Hours and 14 minutes ago," Amara continued, "we detected your ships entering the system at the FTL threshold. At that moment, we launched a kinetic strike package from Terran Defense Platform 7, positioned in the outer system. The package was aimed at Imperial Outpost Sector 7G, designation Forward Watch 9. At the speed and trajectory of the package, it would have arrived approximately 4 minutes ago." She paused, just for a moment. "We're receiving confirmation now." She glanced to her left. Someone off-screen nodded once. "Yes, Forward Watch 9 is no longer operational. I want to be clear that this was not an act of war. It was a demonstration. We have 11 more packages already in transit toward pre-selected Imperial coordinates. We have the targeting data for 47 more locations, including 3 of significant strategic value, and we can launch within minutes if necessary." Orland's communications officer was trying to reach Imperial Command. The channels were already flooding with priority flags from elsewhere in the sector. The confirmation coming in about Forward Watch 9 wasn't just reaching Orland's ships. It was hitting the entire Imperial communications grid simultaneously. "We are not primitive," Amara said. Her voice did not harden. It didn't need to. It was simply true, stated the way you might state that water was wet. "We were never primitive. We were underestimated, which is a different thing entirely. And I need you to go back to your Grand Admiral and your High Conclave and tell them something from us." She looked directly into the camera. "Tell them that was only the beginning." The channel closed. Captain Drev Orland sat in his command chair for a long moment. Then he looked at his navigation officer. "Take us back," he said quietly. "Full retreat. Send everything to command, priority 1. The 3 cruisers turned and ran. The transmission reached Grand Admiral Verk Solen 40 minutes later. He watched it from beginning to end without speaking. Then he watched it again. Then he set it down and looked out at the starfield beyond his window for a very long time. For the first time in 60 years, Verk Solen felt something he almost didn't recognize. He felt uncertain. The High Conclave had not convened in emergency session in over 2 centuries. The chamber was a vast, ancient hall carved into the living rock of Velkarin's central mountain, a room designed to make anything inside it feel small, including its occupants. The 40 seats of the member species curved in a great arc around a central floor where speakers stood to address the body. Every seat was filled. Some representatives had traveled for days to be here. Some had not slept. All of them had watched the transmission from Captain Orland's cruisers and the confirmation footage from Forward Watch 9, which was now a cloud of cooling debris, where an outpost of 340 Imperial personnel had stood 12 hours earlier. The debate began badly and deteriorated quickly. General Mraxus of the Drakthari military faction rose first and delivered 16 minutes of controlled fury. The answer was simple: assemble the 4th Expeditionary Fleet, 2,000 ships, the largest single military deployment in Imperial history, and reduce Earth to glass. Make the example so total, so absolute, that no species for the next 10,000 years would consider the same path. The mathematics were not complicated. Humanity had 60 ships. The Empire had 2 million. This was not a war, it was a correction. Several voices rose in agreement. Mraxus had supporters. Then High Arbiter Sulen of the Vreth stood up, and the chamber went quiet in the particular way it always did when she spoke, not from protocol, but from the instinctive recognition that she was the oldest mind in the room, and that old minds had earned the silence. Sulen said nothing for a moment. She let the quiet settle. Then she opened a file on the central display, the complete xenosociological record of humanity, compiled over 3 years of surveillance, and began to read from it. Not a summary, actual excerpts. She read the dates of humanity's chemical weapons use in 1915. She read the technical specifications of the nuclear weapons used in 1945 and the doctrine of mutually assured destruction that followed, a strategic framework in which a species had, quite deliberately, built enough weapons to destroy its own planet 17 times over as a deterrent. Not to use, simply to have, simply so the other side knew. She read about the 19 major wars of the 20th century. She read about the cyber weapon programs of the early 21st. She read, in a calm and academic voice, about the specific moment in 2029 when three nations had simultaneously developed directed energy weapons capable of disabling orbital infrastructure, and had each, separately and secretly, concluded that the others had done the same, and had pulled back not from morality but from pure strategic calculation. The chamber was completely silent. "These are not the records of a species that stumbled into aggression," Sulen said, closing the file. "This is the record of a species that has been refining violence as a technology for 5,000 years, that understood deterrence before they understood antibiotics, that built geopolitical systems of mutual destruction and called it stability." She paused. "General M. Raxus wants to send the 4th Expeditionary Fleet. I would like to ask, does the general know what humanity built in the 14 months we gave them? We gave them 14 months because we expected them to despair. Instead, they built 60 warships and a kinetic strike capability that destroyed our outpost before we even arrived. What do they build in the 2 years it takes us to mobilize and deploy a full war fleet?" Silence. "And there is another consideration," Sulen continued. "The transmission. The young woman who spoke to Captain Orland did not threaten us. She informed us. She was precise, calm, and she gave us the exact information we needed to understand her position. That is not the behavior of a species that wants war. That is the behavior of a species that wants respect. There is a difference. A species that warns you before it acts is a species that still believes communication is possible." She looked directly at M. Raxus. "When we destroy that belief, we get something worse. We get a species with 5,000 years of weapons development and nothing left to lose." The vote for a diplomatic delegation passed 22-16. It was the closest vote in conclave history. M. Raxus left the chamber without speaking. His aide noted, filing her report that night, that the general had been completely silent for 4 hours, and that silence from a man who never stopped talking was the most frightening thing she had witnessed all week. Humanity built the diplomatic station in 80 days. The Empire had offered one of its own neutral stations for the summit, and the offer had been politely declined. Dr. Amara Osai had responded that humanity preferred to host, and that the station would be completed in time. The Empire's logistics analysts ran the numbers and privately concluded it was impossible. An orbital station of sufficient size and capability simply could not be built in 80 days with humanity's current industrial base. They were wrong by 4 days. Humanity finished it in 76 days, and the extra 4 were spent on interior design. They named it the table. It was not beautiful in the imperial sense. No sweeping architecture, no luminous alloy panels, no attempt to project power through aesthetics. It was functional, solid, and arranged around a central conference room that contained, in fact, an actual wooden table. Amara had insisted on the wood. It had come from a forest in Ghana. It smelled, faintly, of the earth it had grown from, and every imperial delegate who entered the room noticed the smell and couldn't quite identify why it unsettled them. The Empire sent its finest diplomatic minds. Chief negotiator Arvind Thal had successfully negotiated 11 planetary absorptions. He had a gift for reading species psychology, for identifying the specific pressure points where resolve cracked and compliance followed. He arrived at the table confident, gracious, and prepared for every scenario his team had modeled. Humanity sent 6 people. Dr. Amara Osai, Minister of Galactic Affairs. General Kwame Asant, retired, who had spent 35 years running military strategy, and had the specific, unhurried stillness of a man who had seen far worse situations than this one resolve in his favor. Dr. Emmanuel Park, a trade economist who had restructured 3 failing national economies and had the unsettling habit of being able to recite verbatim any document he'd read more than once. 2 legal scholars whose combined publication record on international treaty law ran to over 400 papers. And Priya Nair, who was now 17 years old and carried a small data chip in her left pocket. Thal began with the standard opening, managed independence, a framework the Empire had refined across 11 worlds. Earth would retain cultural and governmental autonomy. Economic integration would be gradual over 20 years with protections for key industries. It was, Thal said with genuine warmth, a generous offer, one the Empire did not make to every world. Earth had, in a strange way, earned this version of the terms. Amara listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she slid a document across the wooden table. Humanity's counterproposal was 43 pages long. Thal read the first page and paused. He read it again. Humanity did not want managed independence. Humanity wanted a full seat in the High Conclave, a voting member, immediately, equal to any other species, with all information access and political rights that membership entailed. Not in 3 generations. Now. The room went very quiet. Thal recovered smoothly. He explained with patient diplomacy that full conclave membership was reserved for civilizations that had demonstrated sustained interstellar presence and cultural stability over multiple centuries. It was not a judgment, it was a structural requirement. No exception had ever been made. General Asante said nothing. Dr. Park began quietly reciting, from memory, the original conclave membership charter and 3 specific clauses that had never been formally tested in arbitration. And then Priya Nair reached into her pocket, took out the data chip, and placed it in the center of the wooden table. That contains a partial proof of concept, she said. Her voice was calm in the particular way of someone who is young and has not yet learned to be afraid of powerful rooms. For a directed gravitational collapse device, the theory suggests it could initiate stellar implosion at a range of approximately 0.3 light-years. The full design is distributed across 14 secure locations on Earth and 3 in deep space. I want to be transparent. We don't have a working prototype yet. But the theoretical framework is complete, and we expect a working prototype within 18 months. Thal looked at the chip. He looked at Priya. He looked at Amara, who met his gaze with an expression of absolute composure. "We're not threatening you," Amara said quietly. "We're introducing ourselves, properly this time." The negotiations lasted 9 more days, but everyone in that room knew, from the moment Priya's chip touched the table, how they were going to end. 940 million people watched the conclave vote live. Amara had insisted the feed be public, transmitted openly, in real time, to every screen on Earth. Some of her advisors had argued against it. The risk of public reaction to a negative result could be destabilizing. Amara had listened to the argument carefully, and then said that humanity had spent 14 months doing extraordinary things, because ordinary people had decided collectively that they would not be absorbed without a fight, and those people deserved to see what happened next, whatever it was. So they watched. They watched High Arbiter Sulen cast her vote in favor calmly, without drama, the way she did everything, and 2 billion people simultaneously felt something release in their chests. They watched the Drakthari bloc vote against, every member, in a display of unified hostility that translated clearly across species boundaries. They watched the smaller member species, the ones the Empire had absorbed generations ago, and who had been quiet for centuries, vote in patterns that suggested something was shifting in the room, some old arrangement of obedience and resentment beginning to crack. The count came in slowly, one by one, until the tally read 22 in favor, 16 against, 2 abstentions. Earth had a seat. What happened next was, And this was reported by every journalist, every sociologist, every imperial observer who was watching, completely human. There was celebration, yes. Enormous, loud, spreading across every city simultaneously, people embracing strangers in the streets, fireworks going up spontaneously in 100 cities without any coordination. But woven into the celebration was everything else. Arguments everywhere about what this meant and what came next and whether the empire could be trusted. A satirical video mocking chief negotiator Thal's face when Priya placed the chip, already seen by 300 million people within the first hour. A small, quiet memorial service that no government had organized, but that spread organically to 17 countries. A gathering of people who had lit candles for the 340 Imperial personnel who had died when Earth destroyed Forward Watch 9, and who believed that remembering that cost was part of what it meant to win something worth winning. Humanity did not celebrate cleanly. It never did. General Quaim Assant watched the feeds from his office on the table without expression. When the final count came in, he hadn't cheered. He had simply nodded slowly, the way a man nods when something he predicted happens exactly as he predicted it. After a long time, he walked to Amara's office and stood in the doorway. "You think they'll honor it?" he asked. Amara was already reviewing the next briefing document. 12 petitions from smaller conclave species requesting information about humanity's legal challenges to imperial economic treaties. She didn't look up immediately. "Not all of them," she said. "Emraxis won't. His bloc won't. There will be attempts to restrict our access, delay our information rights, find procedural ways to marginalize us." She set the document down. But 22 of them voted yes. Some from genuine principle, some from strategic self-interest, some just because Sulen asked them to. That mix is enough. The ones who'd break the agreement know the others are watching, and they're still afraid of what we might have finished building in the time, since Priya put that chip on the table. "Have we," Assant asked, "finished building it?" Amara looked at him for a moment. "Does it matter?" she said. Assant considered that. Then something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile but was close to one. "No," he said. "I suppose it doesn't." 5 years later, Grand Admiral Verk Solen sat in his private viewing gallery above the conclave chamber and watched a human representative filibuster a military appropriations vote by reading, in a clear and unhurried voice, from the full historical record of every war crime committed by every species currently voting in favor of the bill, including, and he paused for emphasis on each one, the Empire's own. The chamber could not move forward. Procedurally, they were bound to let him finish. He had been talking for 6 hours. Verk poured himself a drink. It had taken him 2 years to admit, privately, that High Arbiter Sulen had been right. Not about everything, never about everything, but about the core of it. Humanity had not wanted war. Humanity had wanted in. And in was proving, in ways Verk had not anticipated, to be the most disruptive thing they could possibly have allowed. Humans, it turned out, were constitutionally incapable of sitting quietly at a table and accepting the room as they found it. They noticed things, old things, settled things, arrangements that had been in place for so long that everyone had stopped seeing them as arrangements and had started seeing them as simply how the galaxy worked. Humans looked at those arrangements the way they had apparently looked at everything throughout their history, with the specific, tireless suspicion of a species that had spent millennia being governed badly and had developed an immune response to it. They filed motions, constantly. They built coalitions among the smaller member species, the absorbed worlds, the protectorates, the ancient tributaries, who had been quietly resentful for centuries and had simply never had anyone to stand beside them while they said so. They introduced legislation for independent oversight of imperial resource extraction contracts. They requested that the conclave establish an arbitration body with actual enforcement capability. They proposed, with complete seriousness, the concept of term limits for high conclave seats, a suggestion that had generated a silence in the chamber so profound it had been described by observers as physical. The empire had not collapsed, but it was different. Not in any single large way, in hundreds of small ways that kept accumulating. A trade treaty here, revised under human organized pressure. A military operation there, delayed and eventually canceled after a human-led information disclosure motion forced the strategic rationale into public record. 3 formerly subjugated species in active renegotiation of their absorption terms, represented by human legal scholars who had spent 4 years learning imperial contract law, and had found, with what appeared to be genuine glee, that several of the original absorption agreements contained clauses that had never been properly ratified. In a small office on the table, now a permanent diplomatic hub, expanded twice and housing representatives from 14 species who had requested human legal and political counsel, Dr. Amara Osai was reviewing a report that detailed 32 new requests for assistance from worlds the Empire considered settled and quiet. They were not, it turned out, quiet. They had been waiting. Priya Nair appeared on the comm screen. She was 22 now, completing a dual degree in astrophysics and galactic treaty law at a university that had been founded 18 months ago specifically, because existing institutions couldn't hold the volume of students trying to enter those fields. She had the same direct, slightly distracted quality she'd had at 17, the manner of someone whose mind was always running slightly ahead of the conversation. The gravitational collapse research, she said. The TDC wants a decision. Do we formally disclose the development status in the next conclave session as a show of transparency or maintain strategic ambiguity? Amara looked out the viewport. The stars were dense out here, far from Earth's light pollution. She had spent 5 years learning their names, their distances, their politics. She still wasn't done. Maintain ambiguity, she said, but let it slip, informally, through back channels, that we've had some interesting theoretical breakthroughs in the last 6 months. Have we? Tell them yes, Amara said. Priya grinned, brief, sharp, gone quickly. Done. The channel closed. Amara sat for a while in the quiet of her office, surrounded by documents from 32 worlds that had decided that a species which had frozen an empire with 7 words and a data chip might be the allies they had been waiting generations for. She thought about the morning she had watched Endurance IV climb into the sky, the feeling she hadn't been able to name. She could name it now, she thought. It wasn't pride. It wasn't triumph. It was the same thing humanity had always felt when it looked up at the sky, that specific, stubborn, completely irrational certainty that whatever was up there, they were going to be part of it. She pulled the next report toward her and got back to work. Outside the viewport, the galaxy turned, older and larger and stranger than anything her ancestors had imagined, and full, absolutely full of people who had made the mistake of underestimating what lived on a pale blue dot in a minor spiral arm of an unremarkable galaxy. They were learning. Slowly, but they were learning. And